Part 1. The evening had just begun, and the grand hall of the hotel was slowly filling with warm lights and soft chatter. The place always carried a kind of polished charm, the kind that impressed visitors before they even noticed the details. But for the young server moving quietly between the tables, it was just another long shift. She knew exactly how many steps it took to cross from the door to the far corner, how many glasses each table needed, and how the lights reflected against the marble floor. She noticed everything, yet almost no one noticed her. She worked with gentle movements, careful not to make a single sound louder than it needed to be. Her uniform wasn't new, but she kept it neat. She tied her hair back the same way every day, brushed her sleeves every few minutes out of habit, and stayed focused on her work. Being invisible had become normal to her. It was easier that way. Most nights she took comfort in routine. But tonight felt different. The hotel was preparing for a grand charity gala, something much bigger than the usual dinner parties or corporate events. Staff members rushed around the room carrying trays of silverware and freshly folded napkins. The decorators were still making last-minute adjustments to the flower arrangements. The lights technicians checked the ceiling panels more than once, and on the center stage, under a soft spotlight, stood a grand piano. Its polished surface shone so brightly that she couldn't resist glancing at it each time she walked by. It wasn't just any piano. It was the kind that made people pause, the kind that held stories, the kind that demanded respect. Every time she passed it, her steps slowed. She tried not to make it obvious, but her eyes always traced the smooth curve of its edges and the shine of its black and white keys. Memories stirred with every glance. Her father's voice floated in her mind, calm and patient, guiding her hands as he taught her to play when she was a child. She remembered the small apartment they lived in, where the piano took up more space than the kitchen table. She remembered how she'd sit at the instrument for hours, losing track of time. Those memories felt distant now. Life had changed. Her father was gone, and dreams had to be set aside. Rent didn't pay itself. Food didn't magically fill the shelves. And music, as beautiful as it was, didn't give her the stable income she needed. So she worked here, double shifts when she could, sometimes triple on holidays. Her fingertips were used to carrying trays and wiping tables, not gliding across piano keys. But still, the sight of the piano tugged at something deep inside her. One of the other servers brushed past her with a stack of plates. "Big night," he muttered under his breath. She nodded with a soft smile. "Yeah, looks like it. They say some billionaire guests are coming," he continued, lowering his voice as though the chandeliers might be listening. "People who could buy this whole place if they felt like it." She didn't react. Others cared about such things. She didn't. Wealthy or not, guests were guests, and her job stayed the same. The staff had been told again and again that everything had to be perfect. The hotel couldn't afford a single mistake, not with the kind of people attending tonight. They were told not to speak unless spoken to, not to rush, but not to slow down, to smile, but not too much. It was the kind of pressure that made most workers nervous, but she carried herself calmly. She had learned to stay composed through much. Harder things dot as the musicians hired for background strings rehearsed near the stage. She paused for a moment while arranging a row of glasses on a table. The soft melody drifted across the hall, and she breathed in slowly. Music always had a way of reaching the parts of her she kept locked away. She didn't realize one of the event coordinators was watching her. "You good?" the woman asked. She blinked and straightened up. "Yes, sorry, just listening." The coordinator smiled briefly, but her expression was tense. Everyone was feeling the pressure tonight. "Make sure the tables near the stage are perfect," the coordinator said. "Those guests are picky." Of course, she replied. She walked toward the stage, carrying a tray of freshly polished glasses. When she got closer to the piano, she hesitated for half a second, the memories rising stronger than before. But she kept her face calm, set the tray down on the table near the stage, and continued working. As she placed the glasses, she caught her reflection on the piano's surface. Her eyes seemed tired, but there was something else in them, too, something she hadn't seen in a while. A kind of longing. She turned away before anyone noticed. A few hours before the event officially began, the place was nearly ready. The chandeliers cast golden light across the tables. The stage crew checked the microphone cables and adjusted the chairs. The servers made rounds, making sure nothing was out of place. She took a short break in the staff room, sipping water and stretching her back. Her feet were already sore, and the night hadn't even started. Think the famous pianist will actually show up on time? One of the younger staff members joked. Another server laughed. People like him don't worry about time. They make us wait. She listened quietly, but didn't join the conversation. She knew better than to assume things about people she'd never met. Still, the idea of a famous pianist playing on that beautiful piano stirred emotions she didn't want to examine. When the break ended, she walked back into the hall. The first guests would be arriving soon. She checked the tables once more, adjusting a crooked napkin, smoothing a tablecloth, and checking that each candle was perfectly centered. As she walked past the stage again, one of the audio crew members was testing the microphone. The sound echoed slightly through the hall, bouncing off the high ceilings. "Beautiful instrument, isn't it?" he said when he noticed her looking. She nodded. "Yes, very. Ever played one like this?" Her breath caught in her chest for a moment, but she kept her expression neutral. "A long time ago," she said softly. He didn't push for more. Something in her tone told him not to. The clock moved faster than anyone wanted, and soon the doors opened. Guests stepped in wearing elegant clothes, each one looking around with approval. Servers hurried in coordinated movements, offering drinks and guiding guests to their seats. She moved quietly between the tables, careful and focused. She avoided looking at the piano. Now it felt too risky, like opening a door she had kept shut for years. A group of wealthy guests walked past her, discussing investments and travel plans. Their words blended together, turning into background noise. She didn't envy their lives. She didn't want to be like them. But she wished, secretly, quietly, that she could live in a world where her music mattered again. Not as more guests arrived. The hall grew louder. Waiters filled glasses of sparkling water. Small groups gathered, chatting while admiring the decorations. The pianist was supposed to arrive any minute now, the coordinator had said. She tried to stay focused on her work, but her thoughts kept drifting back to memories, her father's hands guiding hers over the keys, the soft notes echoing through their tiny home, the way he would smile proudly when she mastered a new piece. She inhaled deeply, grounding herself. Tonight wasn't about her. She had a job to do. She stepped outside the hall for a moment to retrieve a tray of desserts from the kitchen. When she returned, she overheard two staff members whispering urgently near the entrance. "What do you mean he's stuck?" One of them said, "Traffic accident on the main road. His car isn't moving." Her steps slowed. "Is he coming at all?" "They don't know. Maybe late, maybe very late." The event coordinator rushed toward them, panic already showing on her face. "We can't delay the performance. The host will be furious." These guests didn't come here to just eat and talk. The hall was growing noisier, the wealthy guests growing restless, unaware of the problem. But the tension behind the scenes was building. And though she didn't know it yet, the night was already shifting in a direction none of them could have imagined. She held the dessert tray a little tighter, her heartbeat steady but alert. She didn't speak. She didn't even move. But something deep inside her stirred something old, something familiar, something she thought she had left behind Dot in the middle of all the rushing footsteps, all the worried whispers, all the pressure. Rising in the room, the quiet server simply stood there, and the piano waited. Part 2. The trouble started quietly, almost like a small ripple that nobody noticed at first. The hall was buzzing with conversations, the kind that sounded confident and polished. The wealthy guests laughed softly, swirling drinks in crystal glasses, as servers moved carefully around them. The atmosphere was warm, full of expectation. Everyone was waiting for the big moment, the opening performance by the famous pianist. But behind the scenes, panic was building. The young server had just finished setting down a tray of drinks near the back tables when she heard hurried footsteps. The event coordinator rushed past her, phone clutched in her hand, her face pale and tense. She whispered something to one of the staff members, and though the young server tried not to listen, the words drifted toward her. Still stuck in traffic. No movement. They don't know when he'll arrive. The young server paused mid-step. It was the pianist. He was supposed to be on stage soon, and the entire event depended on him. The organizers had promoted him heavily, using his name to draw attention to the charity gala. People came early just to hear him. Some had donated huge amounts because they were fans of his music. He wasn't someone who could be replaced easily. A sense of unease spread through the staff. Even those who usually carried themselves with calm professionalism were starting to feel the weight of the problem. One server nearly dropped a stack of plates, fumbling in distraction. Another kept glancing nervously toward the stage. The young server tried to refocus on her work, but the tension around her made it impossible. She moved from table to table, her hands steady, but her heart beginning to beat a little faster. The large piano on stage gleamed under the spotlight, almost as though it were watching everyone, waiting for someone to come claim those silent keys. Minutes passed. More whispers spread. Guests began noticing the delay. Wasn't the performance supposed to start already? One woman asked, frowning at her program. Maybe they're running behind schedule? Her companion replied. Though he sounded impatient, Dot, the event coordinator stepped onto the stage and whispered something to the host. His jaw tightened. He glanced across the room, then at the expectant. Faces staring back at him. He forced a smile, but the server could see the worry beneath it. The coordinator hurried backstage again. A few staff members followed. Looking stressed out, the young server placed a tray down and took a slow breath. Her eyes drifted again to the piano, and the memories floated back her father's hands, guiding hers. The warm tone of an old wooden instrument filling their little home. Music had always felt like a safe place, a place where time slowed and everything made sense. She shook her head gently. Tonight wasn't about her. She reminded herself that she was here to work, not to think about what used to be. Still, the piano seemed to shine a little brighter than before. Near the stage, one of the audio crew members dropped his headset onto the control table. "We need a backup plan," he said. "The crowd won't sit here waiting forever." "There is no backup plan," the coordinator replied sharply. "We booked only one pianist." "Then find someone," another staff member snapped. "Anyone who knows how to. Play something. At least until he arrives." A laugh escaped from one of the lighting crew workers, half joke, half desperation. "Unless one of us magically knows piano, that's not happening." The comment made someone else chuckle, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was the kind of laugh people made when they were out of solutions. The young server kept her eyes down, pretending she hadn't heard the conversation, though every word had reached her clearly. Her hands tightened around the tray she was holding. She didn't want anyone to look at her. She didn't want anyone to guess. She had never told anyone here that she used to play. She placed the tray on a table and stepped back, trying to steady her breath. Her heart was beating a little too quickly now. She wasn't nervous about playing. She was nervous about being seen. She had spent years making herself invisible, blending into the background, doing her work quietly, but the idea, the faint possibility, that she could help it stirred something she had buried. It felt strange, dangerous, hopeful. She kept her head lowered and continued, moving through the hall. The host stepped onto the stage, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We're experiencing a small delay, but the performance will begin shortly. Please enjoy your drinks and appetizers." His voice sounded calm, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. He stepped off the stage quickly, muttering something under his breath. Guests weren't buying the calm tone. They exchanged looks, some frustrated, some bored, some simply curious. A few checked their watches. Others waved down servers for more drinks, as though filling the time with food would make the delay easier to bear. The hall grew louder. Conversations overlapped. The energy changed from excitement to annoyance. Near the backstage entrance, the coordinator's voice grew. More urgent. "We can't stall any longer. We need someone to play. Even if it's not the main performance. Just something soft. Something simple. Anything." "But who?" someone asked. "Nobody here plays." There was a pause. Then the audio crew member said with a forced laugh, "All right, last call. Anyone in this building know how to play even one song?" His tone was joking, but everyone knew it wasn't really a joke anymore. The young server froze. She didn't move, not even a little. Her fingers twitched at her sides. She stared at the floor, heart thudding against her ribs. She could. She knew she could. Even after years of not playing, the music still lived in her hands. Her father's lessons never left her. She could sit at that piano and play something soft, something warm, something that might calm the restless room. But she also knew what would happen if she stepped forward. People would stare. People would judge. People would wonder why a server thought she had the right to sit at a piano meant for a world-class performer. Her throat tightened. She turned away slightly, as if running from her own thoughts. But the idea wouldn't let her go. Another staff member said, "Meaning literally. Anyone, even a beginner, would be better than silence." The young server swallowed hard. Her fingertips tapped against her leg. Her breath shook quietly. Finally she whispered, too softly for most to hear, I know how to play. A little." The staff member closest to her blinked. "What?" She hesitated, then repeated a little louder. "I can play. I mean, if you need someone to fill time, I can try." Her voice trembled slightly, not with fear of the piano, but with fear of being exposed. The first staff member she told looked at her with raised eyebrows, then quickly waved the coordinator over. "She says she can play," he whispered. The coordinator stared at the young server, as though trying to decide if this was a prank. "You?" she asked. The young server nodded gently, her expression calm, even as her heartbeat thundered inside her. "How much do you know?" the coordinator pressed. "Enough," she said softly. She didn't know how else to explain it. She hadn't touched a piano in years, but she knew she could still play. Music wasn't something she ever forgot. The coordinator rubbed her forehead. "I don't know. This is risky. If you make a mistake, the guests will notice. These people are used to perfection." The young server lowered her gaze. "I understand. I only offered because you needed someone." The coordinator let out a long breath. She looked at the restless crowd. She looked at the empty stage. She looked at the young server again. "Fine," she said at last. "Just play something soft. Background music. Nothing fancy. We just need to calm the room until he arrives." The young server nodded. But inside, she felt something shifting, something she couldn't name. "Go to the side of the stage," the coordinator said. "We'll bring you up when we're ready." The young server walked slowly toward the stage, her palms warm with a mix of nerves and something that felt almost like longing. She stood near the velvet curtains, watching the hall from the shadows. She could feel the heat of the stage lights even before stepping onto it. The piano stood only a few feet away now, glowing under the soft spotlight. It looked both familiar and distant, like a friend she hadn't spoken to in years. One of the staff members approached her quietly. "Are you sure you want to do this?" She nodded without hesitation. "If it helps, I'll do it." He studied her for a moment, then gave a small, encouraging smile. "Good luck." She took a slow breath, steadying herself. Her hands relaxed, her mind quieted. The piano waited. Moments later, the coordinator stepped onto the stage again. She whispered something into the host's ear. He looked surprised, then doubtful, but eventually nodded. He stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for your patience. While we wait for our scheduled performer, we have a small piece to share with you, a simple musical interlude to keep the evening flowing." He gestured toward the side of the stage. The young server inhaled once deeply. Then she stepped forward. Her simple uniform contrasted sharply with the elegant clothing of the guests. Some raised their eyebrows. Others whispered. A few looked annoyed, but as she walked slowly toward the piano, the noise softened. She reached the bench. Her fingers trembled. For a moment, as she lifted her hands toward the keys, she closed her eyes, and the hall waited. Part 3. The hall was still humming with quiet confusion when she reached the piano bench. The steps she took toward the instrument felt slower than usual, almost like time itself had decided to stretch just for her. She wasn't afraid of the piano. No, she had never feared it. What unsettled her was the number of eyes, now following her every move. She could feel their curiosity pressing against her back. Some guests leaned forward, trying to understand what was happening. Others exchanged looks, wondering why a server, someone who carried trays and cleaned up spills, was approaching the grand instrument meant for a star performer, but she kept her gaze low. Confidence wasn't something she wore openly. It stayed inside her, quiet and steady, the way her father taught her to hold a note until it stopped trembling. She sat down at the bench, smoothing her palms lightly on her uniform. The piano keys were only inches away, and already her heart felt lighter, as if something within her recognized a long-lost friend. The host stepped aside, unsure of how this moment would unfold. Even the coordinator, who stood near the curtains, held her breath. No one knew what to expect. The young server closed her eyes for a brief moment. She tried to silence the whispering voices, the shifting chairs, the clinking glasses. She tried to forget the heavy gold chandeliers above her and the expensive suits around her. She tried to forget the expectation sitting thick in the room, and slowly she let her mind wander to the one place that had always felt safe, her father's small apartment. The broken window that let in cold air during winter, the old wooden piano, pushed against the wall, its surface covered in tiny scratches. Her father's warm voice filled with patience. She breathed in, and she placed her fingers gently on the keys. The first note came out soft, almost hesitant, like a secret being whispered into the air. A few guests tilted their heads, surprised by the quiet charm of the sound. It wasn't loud or flashy. It didn't demand attention. It simply existed, warm and gentle. Then she played the second note, the third. A simple melody formed, one her father had taught her when she was small enough to need a cushion to reach the keys. It was a tune he wrote for her, A tune, he said, would always remind her that music could open doors, even when life closed them. The hall began to still. The conversations softened, fading into the background like shadows retreating from the light. Even the servers, who were instructed to never pause during service, stopped mid-step for a moment. Listening, her fingers moved carefully but naturally, finding their place as though they had never forgotten the feeling. The notes grew stronger, weaving through the room like a ribbon of warmth. She kept her eyes closed. She didn't dare look up. She didn't want to see the room or the expressions on people's faces. She didn't want her shy heart to panic and break the fragile calm she had created. She only listened to the sound, to the memory, to the part of her she had buried under bills and long shifts and exhaustion. The melody spread gently across the hall. The guests who had been restless moments ago now sat silently, their attention caught by the unexpected beauty coming from the stage. One man set down his drink, unable to keep pretending he wasn't curious. A woman nearby lowered her phone, her eyes softening. A group of young adults near the center table nudged each other, startled that a server could produce something so smooth, so graceful. No one had expected this. Not from her. Not tonight. Young server played on, unaware of how the atmosphere had changed. Her touch grew more confident, her shoulders relaxing as she let the music lead her. She shifted into a more emotional part of the tune, one that always reminded her of goodbyes and new beginnings. Her breath shook slightly, but her hands stayed steady. She didn't rush. She didn't try to impress. She simply played from a place that had gone quiet for far too long. It wasn't until she reached a softer section that she dared to open her eyes. What she saw almost made her fingers falter. The room was still, completely still. Not a whisper, not a clink of glass, not a shifting chair. Every face, every single one was turned toward her. Their eyes weren't mocking or annoyed. They weren't arrogant or bored. They were watching. Really watching. Some looked surprised. Others looked touched. A few even looked emotional, blinking slowly as though the melody had nudged something inside them. The young server felt her pulse flutter, but she didn't stop. She lowered her gaze again and continued playing. Her nervousness blended into determination. If she stopped now, she would never forgive herself. So she kept going. The melody rose a little higher, then fell gently, moving like a story that didn't need words. Her expression softened. Her movements grew more fluid. Her father used to say that music was a kind of truth, that when someone played from the heart, it showed who they really were. Maybe that was why the room listened so deeply now. Maybe they weren't hearing a simple background tune anymore. Maybe they were hearing her. Near the back of the hall, the event coordinator stood frozen, her earlier worry replaced by shock. This was no simple filler performance. This wasn't someone playing a little. As the young server had modestly said, this was something different. The audio crew exchanged glances, whispering quietly. "She's good," one of them murmured. "More than good," another replied. But they spoke softly, careful not to break the magic filling the hall. On stage, the young server approached the most emotional part of the tune. Her fingers dipped gently, rising and falling with a calm confidence she didn't know she still had. She could feel warmth spreading across her chest, the familiar feeling of becoming one with the instrument. It wasn't something she could explain. It was something she could only experience. In that moment, she forgot the guests. She forgot the fancy dresses, the shining jewelry, the expensive decorations. She forgot the expectations, the pressure, the fear. She remembered only the music. And for the first time in a long time, she felt alive in a way that didn't come from surviving. It came from feeling. When the final notes approached, she slowed her movement, letting the sound soften gradually. The melody settled like a quiet goodbye, lingering in the air, Even after her fingers lifted from the keys, the hall remained silent. The young server gently placed her hands in her lap, uncertain of what to do. She stared at the piano, afraid to look up. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the room, a single clap echoed. Then another dot, then another dot within seconds. The entire hall erupted into applause. Not polite applause, not forced applause, but real, full, heartfelt applause. People stood. Some whistled softly. A few even called out in admiration. She blinked in shock, her throat tightening. She didn't know how to react. She had never expected this. She had only wanted to help, to ease the tension, to fill the silence. The coordinator brought her hands to her mouth, stunned. The audio crew grinned widely. Even the host looked speechless, staring at her as though seeing her for the first time. The young server rose slowly from the bench, feeling her legs tremble. She gave a tiny, almost shy bow. The applause grew louder. She stepped back from the piano, unsure of whether to leave the stage or wait for instructions. She glanced toward the coordinator, who motioned for her to stay still. At that exact moment, the side door burst open. The famous pianist had finally arrived. He froze when he saw the scene, the grand piano still echoing with the last traces of her melody. The entire hall standing in applause, and the young server on stage. He looked confused, then stunned. Then oddly humbled. But none of that mattered to her, because deep inside her chest, something had shifted, something had awakened. And nothing. The applause, not the stares, not even the arrival of the famous pianist could take that moment away from her. She had stepped forward, she had played, and the world had listened. Part 4 text of approx 1,700 words in simple English without headings goes here. He stood in the quiet hallway for a moment, letting the sound of applause slowly fade behind him as the heavy doors closed. It was hard for him to breathe normally. After the moment he had just lived on that grand stage. The memory of the lights, the shining piano, and the silent audience watching his hands had left him shaken in the best possible way. He felt both light and heavy at the same time, as if relief and fear were fighting inside him. Maybe this night was going to change everything. Or maybe it was just a moment, nothing more. He did not know yet. He only knew one thing. He was not the same person he had been when he first walked into that place. He moved toward the small staff area where he had left his things. People were still talking behind the doors, probably about the music, or about the dinner, or about the usual things rich guests like to talk about. But none of that mattered to him right now. He just wanted to sit down for a second. His legs felt weak, like the strength had been taken out of him when the final note of his song faded into the room. He pushed open the door to the staff hallway. The noise disappeared instantly. The air felt cooler, calmer. A soft humming sound came from a small fridge, and someone's jacket hung loosely on a hook. Everything was so normal here. It was strange to step from a world of shining attention into a space where nobody cared about performances or fancy music. It grounded him somehow. He sat on the small bench where staff usually took short breaks. Resting his elbows on his knees, he lowered his head and closed his eyes. His heart was still beating too fast. He thought about the song again. Every single note had felt like a whisper from his past. It reminded him of the small old piano in his childhood home, the one his mother loved so much, even though half the keys made strange sounds. That piano was the first thing that made him believe music could change a person's life. He wondered what she would think if she could have seen him tonight. A quiet voice interrupted his thoughts. "Hey, you okay?" He looked up. One of the servers he worked with stood in the hallway, holding a tray. She had been rushing around earlier, making sure food reached every table on time. Now she looked at him with concern. "Yeah," he said slowly. "Just needed a moment." "It's been a strange night." She smiled softly. "Strange good or strange bad?" He shrugged. "I'm not sure yet. Everyone's talking about you out there," she said. "They're saying they've never heard anything like that before. Some guests even stood up." He blinked in. Surprise. They stood? Oh, yeah, the whole room. He let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. The thought of all those wealthy people rising from their seats just because of his music felt unreal. He tried to picture it in his mind, but failed. It was too big. "I'm just glad I didn't mess it up," he whispered. The server laughed gently. "Mess it up? If that's what you call messing up, then I hope I mess things up like that someday." He felt heat rise to his face. "Anyway," she continued, "the manager's looking for you. Something about wanting to talk." His stomach tightened. Usually when a manager called a worker over, it was not for something good. Maybe he had broken some rule. Maybe he wasn't supposed to touch the piano at all, even if people said yes. Maybe this whole thing was going to end with him in trouble. He stood up slowly. "Do you know what he wants?" She shook her head. "No idea," but he didn't look upset. More like confused or excited. "I couldn't really tell." He took a deep breath. "All right, thanks." The server gave him a small, encouraging nod before walking down the hallway. He waited until she disappeared around the corner, then smoothed the front of his shirt, even though it still had a few wrinkles from working all night. There wasn't much he could do about that. He wasn't dressed like the guests. He wasn't supposed to be. The walk back toward the main room felt longer than before. When he pushed the door open, the first thing he noticed was the noise. The laughter, the soft music playing from speakers, and the low hum of conversations blended together. But somewhere in between those sounds, he could catch people saying things like, "the boy on the piano," or "that performance." He kept his head down and walked along the wall until he reached the manager, who stood near the back of the room. The manager looked tense, but not in a bad way. He had the expression of someone who wasn't sure how to react to something surprising. "You wanted to see me?" he asked carefully. The manager turned to him with raised eyebrows. "Yes, come with me." Those words usually meant trouble, but the tone didn't sound harsh. The manager led him through a side door to a quieter room. It was a small office with a desk, some papers, and a lamp in the corner. The manager closed the door behind them. "Sit." He obeyed. The manager leaned forward on the desk. "I'll get straight to the point. I've never seen a reaction like that from the guests. Not once. They're actually asking about you. Some of them want to know your name. Others want to know where you've performed before." He swallowed. "I've never performed anywhere." "Not really. So you're telling me that was your first time playing for a crowd that big?" He nodded. The manager rubbed his forehead as if trying to understand something unbelievable. "Well, whatever it was, you impressed them. And there's someone who wants to speak with you personally. A guest. He's waiting outside." He froze. "Why?" "Because," the manager said slowly, "you didn't just entertain people tonight. You touched them. And that's rare." The weight of those words sank into him. He stood up, unsure of what exactly he was walking into. But he followed the manager out of the room. When they stepped back into the main hall, a tall, older man in a dark suit waited near the entrance. His silver hair reflected the warm lights, and his face carried a calm but serious expression. He looked like someone important, someone who made big decisions. The manager introduced them. "This is the young man you're looking for." The older man studied him for a moment, not in a judging way, but with curiosity. "You played beautifully tonight," the man said. "Thank you, sir," he replied quietly. "I've been in the music world for a long time," the man continued. "I've heard many pianists, both trained and self-taught. But what you played tonight, There was honesty in it. It wasn't just skill. It was emotion. He didn't know how to respond. Nobody had ever spoken to him like this. Tell me. The man asked gently, "Where did you learn to play?" "My mother taught me. We didn't have much, but she loved music. She always said a piano doesn't care who you are. It only speaks back the truth you give it." The older man smiled. Faintly. She was right. For a second, the two stood quietly in the middle of the busy hall. People walked around them, unaware of the strange moment taking place. Then the older man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. "I don't want to overwhelm you tonight. You've already had a big moment. But if you ever want guidance guidance, call that number. I know people who can help someone like you go far, very far." The young server's breath caught in his chest. "Are you serious?" "I wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it." The man placed the card in his hand, gave him one last calm nod, and walked away. He stared at the card like it was something unreal, something magical. He couldn't even read the name printed on it because his hands were shaking too much. Manager, watching from nearby, let out a low whistle. "I think your life just changed." But he didn't answer. He wasn't sure what his life was becoming. All he knew was that the night that began with him serving food had ended with something he never imagined. And deep down, even through all the confusion, there was a small spark of hope. A spark he hadn't felt in a very long time. He closed his fingers around the card, held it tightly, and whispered softly to himself, as if afraid someone might hear his secret. Maybe this is the beginning. Part 5 text, approximately 1,700 words. He stared at the small card in his hand for a long moment, as if it carried a weight far heavier than its size. The hall around him was still loud with laughter and music, but none of it reached him clearly. Everything sounded distant, like he was standing underwater. The glow of the chandeliers above flickered across the gold edges of the card, making it look almost unreal. He slipped it carefully into his pocket and walked back toward the staff hallway. His hands were still trembling. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something mixed between excitement and disbelief, the feeling you get when life suddenly takes a turn you never expected. The hallway was quiet again, and he finally allowed himself to sit down. His legs felt weak. He leaned back against the wall, closed his eyes, and tried to breathe slowly. This night had started like any other. He had tied his apron, filled glasses, carried trays, and smiled politely. Nothing in his mind had prepared him for what he had just lived. He had not planned to sit at that piano. He had not planned to play in front of wealthy strangers who would judge him without knowing him. He had not planned for any of this. But life had decided otherwise. He heard footsteps and opened his eyes. The same server from earlier peeked around the corner. "Hey," she said softly. "Are you done talking to them?" He nodded. "Yeah, it was." "Strange. Good, but strange." She stepped closer. "What did that older man want? The one in the suit?" "He gave me a card," he said. "He said he could help me. If I want to go further with music." Her eyes widened. "Are you serious? That's huge." He shrugged. "I don't know what it means yet. I don't even know if people like him say things like that all the time or not." "No," she said firmly. "People like that don't say things for fun." If he said he sees something in you, then he really does. He looked down at his shoes. "Maybe. It still feels unreal." She sat beside him on the small bench. "Listen, I've worked at this place for a few years. I've seen guests get impressed by food, drinks, or the decorations. But I have never seen them react like that to a worker. You did something special tonight. I think you should believe that." He swallowed hard. Her words sank in slowly, like warm water filling a chilly room. "I'm scared," he finally admitted. What if I can't do this again? What if it was only a one-time thing? She shook her head. People don't play like you did by accident. They fell into a comfortable silence. He didn't feel judged. He didn't feel embarrassed. For the first time in a long while, he felt understood. A few minutes later, the manager called out from down the hallway. "Clean-up time. Let's get everything ready before midnight." The night was far from over. Even after a life-changing moment, the world did not pause. Work continued. He stood up, tied his apron again, and followed the team back into the main hall to clear the tables. Most of the guests had already left. A few lingered near the doors, still chatting about the evening. When he passed near them, he heard someone say, "That young man, his playing was incredible." He pretended not to hear, but inside he felt something warm spark again. While he picked up empty glasses and folded napkins, he kept replaying the evening in his mind. The lights, the piano, the eyes of the guests watching him, all of it washed over him in waves. He couldn't believe it actually happened. After nearly an hour, the hall finally looked clean. The staff gathered near the back door, preparing to leave. Some joked about how busy the night had been. Others complained that their feet hurt. But every now and then, someone would glance at him, almost as if they were seeing him in a new light. The server from earlier walked past him and whispered, "Don't forget to keep that card safe." "I won't," he said when he stepped. Outside, the cold air hit him sharply. It was late, close to midnight, and the city felt peaceful. Lights flickered in tall buildings. A few cars moved slowly on the street. He took a deep breath and let the cool night wind fill his lungs. He walked home with his hands shoved deep into his pockets. The card was safe inside one of them. Every step he took felt heavy with thoughts. His mind raced. Was this a chance? A real chance? Or would calling the number lead to disappointment? He didn't know. But one thing was clear. He wouldn't be able to forget tonight. Something inside him had changed. By the time he reached his small apartment, the weight of the long day hit him hard. His room was quiet, dim, and ordinary, so different from the sparkling hall he had left behind. He hung his jacket on the hook near the door and sat on his bed. He took the card out again and looked at the name printed on it. Even though he didn't recognize it, the simple, clean design made it feel important. He placed it gently on his bedside table. He lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Memories of his childhood began washing over him. His mother's warm smile, her hands guiding his on the piano keys, the warm wooden bench they sat on together, the sunlight falling on the dusty old piano. She always believed he had something special, even when he didn't believe it himself. He closed his eyes tightly, wishing she could have been there tonight. The next morning came quickly. The sunlight sneaked through the thin curtains, waking him earlier than usual. His body felt tired, but his mind was alert. The memory of last night was still fresh, as if the music had not yet stopped. He sat up and rubbed his eyes. His gaze drifted toward the small card still resting on the table. After a long moment, he picked it up. He held his phone in the other hand, thumb hovering over the screen. He wasn't sure if he should call. Maybe he should wait a few days. Maybe he should think more. But the curiosity inside him was too strong. He dialed the number. The phone rang once, twice, three times. His heart raced. Then a calm voice answered. "Hello?" He swallowed. Sir, this is the young man you spoke to last night from the event." A voice on the other end brightened slightly. Yes, I remember. I'm glad you called." He wasn't sure what to say. "I wanted to know what you meant about helping me." "I meant exactly what I said," the man replied. "I believe you have talent, real talent, and talent should not go to waste. If you're willing, I can arrange a meeting with someone who can listen to you play properly. Not in a noisy hall, not on a last-minute request, but in a real setting. His breath caught. A real setting? Yes, a music studio. We can set a day this week. He didn't know how to respond. His hands shook again. Take your time. The man said kindly, You don't have to give me an answer right now, but I want you to think about something. Last night, you didn't just entertain people. You moved them. Not many can do that. Some practice for years and never reach that place. But you walked there naturally, and that means something. He felt a burning behind his eyes. No one had ever spoken to him like that. I want to try, he finally said. I'm glad, the man replied. I'll send you the address. Be ready, and bring nothing but your honesty. That's what people heard last night, and that's what they will hear again. The call ended. He sat on the edge of his bed, phone in his hand, heart pounding. He felt like the air around him shifted, as if life had quietly opened a door. He never thought he would see Dot. The message with the address arrived a minute later. He stared at it, reading every detail over and over. A studio. A real studio. He stood up, walked toward the small mirror near his door, and stared at his reflection. He didn't look like someone who belonged in a music studio. He didn't look like someone who should stand in front of important people and play. But last night proved that maybe what he looked like didn't matter. What mattered was the music. That was enough. He took a deep breath and whispered to himself, I can do this. For the rest of the day, he practiced on the Me old keyboard in his room. It wasn't the same as a real piano, but it was all he had. The sound was not perfect. Some keys were slightly off, but the feeling was still there. Every note he played brought him back to the hall, to the shining piano, to the faces of the guests as they listened. He let that memory guide his hand's dot. As evening approached, he felt more prepared, not entirely. Confident, but ready enough to try. Before going to bed, he glanced once more at the address on his phone. Tomorrow would not be just another day. It would be another step into the unknown. He didn't know where it would take him. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid. He was hopeful. Part 5 will be written here in simple, natural, human-centric storytelling of about 1,700 words. The car moved through the quiet streets with a soft hum, and she sat in the back seat, feeling as if the night had wrapped her in a strange dream. The billionaire sat in the front passenger seat instead of next to her, as if he wanted to make her feel safe, or maybe to give her space. She appreciated that. It told her he wasn't trying to cross any lines. Still, her heart beat faster than usual. The night had been too much already. The city's lights passed like soft, glowing streaks through the window. She kept her eyes on them because it was easier than looking at him. Easier than asking herself why he cared, or what he wanted, or how her life had suddenly turned into something she couldn't recognize. After a long silence, he spoke. I hope I didn't scare you earlier. She shook her head a little, though her voice was quiet. No, it was just a lot. He nodded slowly, his eyes staring ahead. I understand. I pushed you too hard. She didn't say anything. She wasn't sure what to say. About what I said earlier, he continued. I meant it. You had something special. I've heard dozens of pianists at events and concerts. But what you did, it wasn't just skill. It was emotion, real emotion. She felt her throat tighten. She wasn't used to being seen like that. Not by strangers. Not by wealthy men with sharp eyes and powerful voices. Thank you, she whispered, still watching the road. I want to give you a chance, he said, to play properly. On a real stage. With real opportunities. Her hands tightened in her lap. It's not that simple. Most things aren't, he admitted. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. She stayed quiet. She didn't want to argue. Not tonight. She was too tired to explain the weight she carried, the bills, the responsibilities, the small apartment she could barely afford, the life she had built on quiet sacrifices. The car slowed, turning down the narrow street where she lived. She straightened up a little, embarrassed that he would see the old buildings, the flickering street lamps, the cracked sidewalks. The driver stopped near her building. The billionaire turned toward her. "Are you sure you'll be all right?" "Yes," she said gently. "Thank you for the ride." She reached for the door, but he spoke again before she could open it. "Will you let me talk to you again?" She froze. He wasn't talking to her like she was, a worker or someone beneath him. He spoke to her like she mattered. Like her answer mattered. She hesitated, then nodded. "We can talk tomorrow, maybe, after my shift." A faint smile touched his face, small but real. "Good night," he said softly. "Good night," she replied, stepping out. She walked toward her building, feeling his eyes on her until the car finally drove away. When she reached her door, she leaned against it for a moment, letting out a long breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her legs felt weak. Her heart felt confused. And her mind felt full, too full. She entered her tiny apartment, dropped her bag on the couch, and sat down without turning on the lights. The silence was thick, but it felt peaceful after the noise of the evening. She stared at her hands, those hands that washed dishes, carried trays, scrubbed counters, those same hands that played the piano like a second voice. "What am I doing?" she whispered to herself. She didn't know the answer, but she knew one thing. Something was changing, whether she was ready or not. The next morning, she woke up later than usual. Her shift didn't start until the afternoon, but her mind had been awake long before the sun, replaying every moment from the night before. She remembered the silence in the room after she finished playing, the faces watching her, the way the billionaire looked at her, not with anger or superiority, but with something she couldn't quite name. Curiosity? Confusion? Respect? She didn't want to think too much about it. She wasn't ready to feel anything bigger than caution. She made herself breakfast, a simple meal, warm and quiet, and tried to push the memories away. But they stayed. They clung to her like soft threads she couldn't pull loose. When she got dressed for work, she chose the same simple uniform she always wore. But she didn't feel the same inside it. Something in her felt different, as if a small flame had been lit in a dark room she had long forgotten. At the restaurant, her coworkers looked at her with eyes full of questions. "You're famous now," one teased. She rolled her eyes. "Don't start." "No, really," another said. "The staff from last night can't stop talking about what you did." She sighed, tying her apron. It was just one song that shut up the entire room. Her coworker insisted. She didn't know what to say, so she simply walked to the back area and began her tasks. It felt safer to move, to work, to keep her hands busy. But even as she worked, she felt eyes on her, not mocking, not dismissive, but curious, respectful. It was strange. It was uncomfortable. Hours passed, and she tried to settle into her routine. But her thoughts kept drifting toward the possibility of what the billionaire might say when he returned. If he returned, maybe he had changed his mind. Maybe he had said those things in the moment without really meaning them. Maybe it was easier for him to admire something briefly and forget it just as quickly. She wouldn't blame him. People with difficult lives were not often remembered by the wealthy. So she worked. And she waited, though she wouldn't admit that part even to herself. Late in the evening, near the end of her shift, the door opened. She didn't look up at first. She wiped down the counter, moved glasses aside, and set fresh plates out. Then someone stepped beside her. She felt it before she saw him, a presence that changed the air around her, quiet but strong. She looked up. It was him, the billionaire. He wasn't dressed in a perfect suit this time. He wore a simple shirt, sleeves slightly rolled, the top button undone. He looked more human like this, less like the untouchable man everyone feared. "You're working hard," he said gently. "I always do," she replied. He nodded. "Can we talk?" She hesitated, but only for a moment. "Let me finish this." She wiped the counter one last time, then motioned for him to follow her to a quiet corner near the back. It wasn't private, but it was far enough from the noise. He looked at her carefully, thoughtfully. "I meant what I said last night," he began. "I want to help you." She crossed her arms gently, not defensive, just uncertain. "Help me how?" He took a slow breath. "I know people. People in music, in performance, in opportunities that matter. I can introduce you, give you lessons, help you prepare for real auditions." Her heart thumped. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "I know enough," he said. "I know talent when I hear it, and I know sincerity when I see it." She looked down at her shoes, unsure how to hold the weight of his words. He continued softly, "I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a chance. What you do with it is up to you." She looked up slowly. "Why me?" she asked. His answer came without hesitation. "Because the world doesn't get moments like yours very often. And when they happen, someone should protect them, support them, make sure they grow instead of disappear." She felt her throat tighten again. She wasn't used to being believed in. "I don't want to take advantage of you," he said. "I don't want anything in return. I just want you to have the life your talent deserves." Her breath shook. She turned her head away for a moment, letting her thoughts settle. After a long silence, she looked back at him. "Can I think about it?" He nodded with a gentle smile. "Take all the time you need." She felt something warm rise in her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time. "Hope." "Thank you," she whispered. He bowed his head slightly. "Before I go, there's one more thing." She waited. His voice softened even more. "I would like to hear you play again. Not in front of a crowd, not for anyone else. Just for yourself. And maybe for me, if you'll allow it." Her lips parted in surprise. She didn't answer right away. He didn't push her. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Maybe someday." His eyes warmed. "I'll wait for that day." He stepped back, giving her space, and walked toward the door. But before he left, he turned briefly and said one last thing. "You are more than the life you're living. Don't forget that." Then he was gone. She stood there long after he left, her heart full of 1,000 feelings, fear, wonder, confusion, and something she dared not name yet. She didn't know what decision she would make, but she knew this. Her life was no longer the same. A door had opened, and she had to decide whether she was brave enough to walk through it.